The prosecution tried to connect the dots between Diddy's business and his alleged abuse of Cassie Ventura and another victim. How? By using witnesses to try to link Diddy to firearms, cash, and control.
I think when people hear Cassie's mother is going to be testifying, everyone was thinking, oh my goodness. But she was only on the stand for about 30 minutes. And the big takeaway is this story that she tells regarding the email she got from her daughter in December of 2011.
Sean Diddy Combs' ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura has been the star witness at his trafficking trial. And now Ventura's mother is taking the stand.
We heard from a male escort who said Diddy controlled everything about the freak-offs with Cassie. And Cassie's mother, she also took the stand, testifying about taking a home equity loan out to wire Diddy $20,000.
Of 2011, this is where Cassie Ventura writes her mother and another person explaining or expressing that Sean Puffy Combs, she said, threatened to put out explicit videos of her. Again, this is around the holiday time, and also saying that he would do something to the person that she was dating at the time. In the email,
testimony from Cassie Ventura's mother at the trial of Sean P. Diddy Combs today. She said Diddy threatened to release tapes featuring Cassie with male escorts. He also demanded that Cassie pay back $20,000 he spent on her.
The last witness on the stand today, he tied Diddy to some pretty serious. Remember that 2024 raid on his home in Miami Beach? The special agent in charge testified that he found parts of AR-15 rifles in Diddy's master bedroom.
So this is when the mother is talking to the jurors, talking to the court, and saying that this was the first time the mom says she realized that her daughter had any issues with possible physical abuse. And in this case, her daughter saying that Sean Combs was going to put these explicit videos out. So her mother said that Sean Combs said that he wanted $20,000 because of money that he spent on Ventura.
Mother told how she received a chilling email from her daughter 2 days before Christmas 2011, telling her that Diddy was planning to release the tapes as early as Christmas Day.
It's also found items that others previously testified would be present at freak-offs. High heels, toys, baby oil, Astroglide, and lingerie.
So the mother and her husband took out a $20,000 home equity loan, transferred that money into a checking account, and then sent it to Combs. What's so interesting about this story is that even though they sent that $20,000 and she said she was in fear of her daughter, she was concerned for her safety.
What would you do if a global superstar demanded $20,000 from you, or else he'd leak something that could ruin your child forever? That's exactly what Cassie Ventura's mother, Regina Ventura, just revealed under oath in a packed federal courtroom. And it wasn't just an emotional testimony, it was a straight-up bombshell that turned heads and dropped jaws. Because for the first time, we got a detailed look at what Cassie's own family went through behind the scenes. And if you thought this trial was intense before, just wait. This isn't just another celebrity scandal. This is a case wrapped in big money, power moves, and disturbing patterns, allegedly involving threats, hush payments, and deeply personal betrayals. And in the middle of it all, a single $20,000 wire transfer that prosecutors claim was meant to keep Cassie under control even after she tried to walk away. Now here's where things get even wilder, because Regina didn't just talk about money. She showed photos, alleged bruises on her daughter's arms and neck. She told the court that she feared for Cassie's safety, and she admitted she took out a home loan just to pay off this demand.
The prosecution, I believe, was trying to show that level of control that they talked about at the very beginning of this case. And then to see that her family talks about being intimidated and fearing for Cassie's safety. And that's why they sent the money, they said, because they were really concerned.
Meanwhile, seated just a few feet away, Sean Diddy Combs listened quietly as the courtroom absorbed every single word. But this wasn't the only shocker on day 7. What followed was a string of jaw-dropping revelations, from a former personal assistant revealing medicine bags filled with unmarked pills, to a performer known as the Punisher describing candlelit sessions that sounded more like movie scenes than real life. And just when you think it couldn't get any stranger, there's talk of defaced equipment, mystery guests, and a rapper's car that mysteriously exploded. Stick with us, because we're about to break down everything that happened, starting with that $20,000 story that might just be the smoking gun. So, what exactly happened with that $20,000? According to court testimony from Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, this wasn't just a heated breakup. It was a financial demand made under deeply personal circumstances. Back in December 2011, Cassie had reportedly begun distancing herself from Sean Diddy Combs. Around this time, she started seeing someone new, rapper and actor Kid Cudi. That's when things allegedly took a serious turn. Cassie, fearing for her safety, returned home to Connecticut and confided in her mother about everything that had been happening.
We also learned that the mother's the one who said, you know what, I want to take pictures of this abuse. Again, the mom said she did not know about that or that was happening until 2011.
Now, here's where it gets intense. Regina testified that after Cassie left the relationship, she received a demand from Diddy himself, $20,000 to recoup what he claimed were expenses spent on Cassie during their time together. But the situation wasn't as simple as just paying back an ex. The way it was framed, it felt more like pressure than closure. Regina told the court that she was so shaken by this demand that she and her husband ended up taking out a home equity loan, yes, a loan against their own house, to get the funds together. Why? In her words, it was for one reason only: to protect their daughter. She said, "I was physically sick." That's how deeply affected she was by what Cassie had shared with her. Now, the defense didn't deny that the demand happened. In fact, they confirmed that Regina did wire the money, but added that the money was eventually returned and that no financial exchange ever continued beyond that one incident. Their argument? That the demand wasn't relevant to the charges in court and would only confuse the jury. But prosecutors saw it differently. To them, this wasn't just about dollars. It was about influence. An example of how Diddy allegedly maintained emotional and financial control long after the relationship ended. They're painting a pattern here.
When it came to the explicit videos, the prosecution asked her, what was your reaction to hearing that your daughter said she was concerned about those explicit videos? When it came to this idea that Cassie was saying, you know, Mom, Sean Combs is threatening to put out explicit videos of me, she said her reaction to that was she was physically sick and that she said, quote, the tapes threw me.
One where Cassie's efforts to move on were met with roadblocks, not support. And it wasn't just words. Regina came prepared, with text messages from her daughter and even photographs of Cassie showing visible injuries. The courtroom went silent as these images were shown, adding a powerful visual layer to an already intense testimony. But if you think that was powerful, just wait. Because next up, a former assistant took the stand and spilled everything about what really went on behind the scenes, including a suitcase filled with things nobody expected. It's one thing to tell the court your child was hurt. It's another thing entirely to show it. And that's exactly what Regina Ventura did next. Sitting just feet away from one of the most powerful men in the music industry, she pulled out a binder filled with printed photographs. These weren't just old family pictures. They were images of Cassie with visible marks, redness around the neck, bruising on the arms, cuts that looked anything but accidental. For a moment, the courtroom was frozen. You could feel the discomfort, the disbelief, the weight of a mother's pain laid bare in still images. Regina told the jury she had taken those photos herself, not years later, not from social media, but at the time when Cassie had returned home to Connecticut after a particularly heated confrontation.
This is how much money I spent on your daughter. I want this money back. The mother testified that she feared for her daughter's safety, so they took out this home equity loan, sent Sean Combs $20,000. He eventually gave the money back.
She described how her daughter had been scared, fragile, and completely changed from the vibrant young woman she once knew. And when asked why she documented the injuries, her answer was heartbreaking. Because I didn't know what else to do. The images gave substance to the earlier claims about the $20,000 wire. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about fear. Real fear. The kind that forces a parent to consider what might happen next if they don't act fast. But that wasn't the end of Regina's testimony. She told the court that after Cassie started dating Kid Cudi, Diddy allegedly sent threatening messages, some of which were read aloud. One message warned of leaking private content, another suggested he would go after both Cassie and her new partner. Regina said it made her physically ill, and she believed those threats were more than just emotional manipulation. They were serious. The defense didn't have much to challenge her with. They didn't argue that she wasn't telling the truth. Instead, they chose a different tactic. They simply said they had no questions. And that silence, it spoke louder than words. Prosecutors are using Regina's testimony to build a bigger picture, one where fear, pressure, and emotional power plays are central. They want the jury to see that this wasn't just a turbulent relationship, it was something that lingered, that followed Cassie and her family even when she tried to escape. But just when you think that testimony couldn't be topped, someone else stepped in. A man who worked side by side with Diddy for years. A man who saw it all, from luxury suites to secret instructions. And what he revealed next would make headlines for days. Enter David James, the man who wasn't just a former employee, he was Diddy's personal assistant. And his testimony didn't just support Cassie's claims, it opened the door to a whole new side of the story. From the very first question, it was clear. David had seen things, a lot of things.
Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, told the jury, "I was scared for my daughter's safety. I knew he was going to try to hurt my daughter. The tapes threw me. I was physically sick."
And unlike most, he remembered the details. According to James, working for Diddy was like living in a constant high-stakes reality show, lavish trips, odd demands, and carefully packed suitcases filled with, let's just say, very specific items. One of the first things prosecutors asked about, the so-called medicine bag. James said this bag, often a designer Louis Vuitton tote, was always stocked and ready, like a mobile survival kit. Inside, dozens of pill bottles, some marked, some not. He listed common things like over-the-counter pain relief and vitamins, but also included more adult-themed items like energy boosters and enhancement meds. One of the most talked-about details, pills shaped like President Obama's face. Yeah, you heard that right. And who paid for all this? James said he would often put it on his own credit card. The company would reimburse him later, but the orders always came straight from Diddy himself. He described how the staff had to keep things perfectly in place, down to the arrangement of water bottles, ointments, and yes, even packs of applesauce. Because apparently, Diddy loved applesauce on everything. But the story didn't stop there. James revealed that when Diddy stayed at hotels, he was almost never alone. Cassie was often present, though other names were mentioned too. James said he would set up the room in advance, sometimes placing items that were personal and private in very specific locations. At one point, he even recalled bringing a suitcase with 40-plus items, just to avoid being called back later for missing one. This wasn't just about being organized, it was about control, about creating an environment where everything was done to exact standards, no matter how unusual. And then came the moment that silenced the room. James described a night when Diddy returned from a party and was furious over a rumor that he had gotten physical with someone at a club.
Cassie Ventura, who was on the witness stand for 4 days last week, is expecting her third child any day now. As Cassie's mother left court, spectators shouted encouragement.
Stay strong, okay?
He stormed in, checked James's browser history, and started asking questions. That alone left James rattled. But what followed was even more unsettling, because the next instructions he got were about Cassie. And they weren't about her safety. They were about keeping her isolated. And just when you think that was enough to send chills down your spine, it escalated into something far more dangerous. David James thought he had seen it all, until the night a late-night burger run nearly turned into something else entirely. It was a simple errand. James, driving Diddy's Silver Navigator, was headed to Mel's Diner in Los Angeles to grab some cheeseburgers. Just a routine trip, until Diddy's security detail, known as D-Rock, spotted someone in the parking lot. That someone? Marion Suge Knight. Now, for those who don't follow hip-hop history, Suge Knight and Diddy weren't exactly on friendly terms. Their rivalry dated back decades. So when D-Rock spotted him, he didn't just sit back, he walked right over. James remembered the moment vividly. Suge didn't recognize D-Rock at first, until D-Rock introduced himself as Biggie's boy. It was a bold statement considering the history. Suge reportedly gave him a nod, but what happened next sent everyone into alert mode. James testified that he saw several black SUVs circling the diner, men stepping out, watching closely. And then, he swears he saw someone hand Suge Knight a weapon. That was the tipping point. Diddy and his team jumped into action. James was ordered to drive and fast. Back at the house, James said Diddy got into the car, holding not one, but 3 firearms on his lap. He wasn't just shaken, he was paralyzed with fear. And when asked why he didn't refuse or say anything, James simply said, I didn't feel like I had a choice. The incident painted a clear picture of how quickly things could go from luxury and comfort to danger and pressure.
Baby oil, lubricant, drugs, and cash. Now that lines up with what Diddy's former assistant testified to today at trial. Now he said he was tasked with stocking Diddy's hotel rooms, but he said he didn't go through the company to get reimbursed for these supplies. Instead, he went to Diddy's security team.
Prosecutors suggested it showed Diddy's tendency to rely on intimidation, not just in his professional life, but in how he maintained influence over others. Whether it was real or just perceived, the message was loud and clear. Don't cross the line. And for James, that wasn't just a one-off. He shared that this wasn't the first time he had been pulled into high-stakes situations, nor the last. In fact, he said that after this night, he knew he had to get out. The risks were piling up, and his loyalty was being tested in ways no assistant should ever face. But intimidation didn't just happen in parking lots. Sometimes it happened behind closed doors, with music playing, candles lit, and someone watching silently from the shadows. That's where our next witness comes in, an unexpected figure with a stage name, a sharp memory, and a story that made even seasoned courtroom reporters blink twice. Just when the courtroom thought it had heard the most unbelievable details. In walked a man who called himself the Punisher. No, that's not a joke. That's the stage name of Sheree Hayes, a male performer from Harlem, known for his years in the entertainment circuit. And what he shared added a surreal layer to the already staggering case against Sean Diddy Combs. Hayes testified that he was hired by Cassie and Diddy for what was described as a private performance at Trump Tower back in 2012. But this wasn't a bachelorette party or a group celebration. According to Hayes, he arrived expecting a crowd, but found only Cassie in a bathrobe with dim lighting, bowls of oil, and specific instructions. The room, he said, was set up like a scene, complete with candles, props, and strict direction. Hayes was told not to speak to Diddy, not to make eye contact, and to follow Cassie's lead. Diddy, he claimed, watched from the shadows, covered in a way that only allowed his eyes to be seen.
And claimed that they would pay him back in cash from the rapper's Louis Vuitton bag. He also testified that the bag could hold $10,000 or more in cash, telling the court, I just think because they were items that he didn't want to have a record for.
According to Hayes, it felt theatrical, almost like a scene being directed for someone's private fantasy. And this wasn't a one-time gig. Hayes told the jury he was called back 8 to 12 times over several years. He was paid in cash, anywhere from $800 to over $2,000 per session. He even admitted that sometimes he struggled to perform due to the pressure and intensity of the environment, especially with someone else silently observing. The most bizarre part, Hayes said he's currently writing a self-help book, part memoir, part reflection, about overcoming personal challenges. And yes, this entire chapter of his life is included, though names have been changed. Still, in court, he made no attempt to hide who the wealthy couple in the book really was. Prosecutors used Hayes' testimony to support a broader theme, that Diddy allegedly maintained strict control over Cassie's environment, choices, and interactions. Whether through emotional influence, elaborate setups, or unspoken expectations, the environment described felt anything but ordinary. But this wasn't just about atmosphere, because while all of this was unfolding behind closed doors, federal agents were gathering evidence out in the open. Evidence that would be shown to the jury in the form of photos, seized items, and floor plans. And what they uncovered, that would take this case from dramatic to downright disturbing. While the courtroom was flooded with stories from ex-employees and past partners.
Now, one of today's other witnesses was a male escort known as the Punisher, a nickname he says comes from his basketball playing days. He took part in Diddy's freak-offs with Cassie as well. And he said Diddy would direct all aspects of those encounters. The escort testified, quote, Diddy would at some point come into the room, sit in the distance, give subtle directions to Miss Ventura based on, like I said, angles and lighting, positioning, and sometimes the sexual activity.
Federal agents were busy building something even more concrete, physical evidence. And that all came to a head during a surprise operation at one of Diddy's most luxurious properties, his Star Island mansion in Miami. It started in March 2024. Homeland Security agents, part of a special investigations unit, launched a late afternoon raid after learning that Diddy and his family were preparing to leave the country. Their goal? To search the property before anything, or anyone, could be moved. What they found was startling. In court, Special Agent Gerald Gannon described entering the home, navigating through sprawling rooms and high-end furniture, and eventually uncovering a collection of items that raised serious red flags. Among them, a partial component of a high-powered item believed to be part of a long-range device. But that wasn't all. There were magazines loaded with rounds, and shockingly, the serial numbers on some of these parts had been completely removed. According to Gannon, defacing these numbers is something often done to prevent authorities from tracing ownership. And for the prosecution, that wasn't just suspicious. It was symbolic. It supported their theory that Diddy operated in secrecy, surrounded by layers of protection and plausible deniability. But weapons weren't the only things they found. Photos presented to the jury showed unusual accessories scattered throughout the mansion. Items often associated with the kind of scenarios described earlier by both David James and The Punisher. Designer shoes, personal items, and high-end toiletries were positioned near what agents described as performance spaces inside the home. There was even mention of a pier on the property, an escape route maybe? Agents said they had to monitor the water access closely to ensure nothing or no one slipped away unnoticed during the search. And all of it, every item, every photograph, every detail, was submitted to the court not as spectacle, but as supporting evidence for the prosecution's broader message. This wasn't just about relationships gone wrong or questionable personal behavior.
We also heard from Cassie's mother, who testified about a payment that she wired to Diddy after Cassie told her that he was threatening to release 2 sex tapes.
It was about creating an environment of control, one where power, privacy, and pressure all collided. But even with this mountain of physical evidence, Diddy's team wasn't backing down. In fact, they were doubling down, with a new attorney, a new plan, and a strategy that some say just might work. Just when things looked like they couldn't get more overwhelming for Diddy, he brought in a new legal powerhouse. Jonathan P. Bach, a high-profile trial attorney with a reputation for flipping impossible cases. Bach isn't just any lawyer. He's represented Wall Street elites, celebrities, and public officials. His courtroom presence is sharp, deliberate, and intimidating, and he wasted no time going to work. His strategy? Focus on discrediting the witnesses, not through direct denials, but by questioning their timing, memory gaps, and motives. Take David James, for example. The defense pointed out that he didn't mention many of these events until recently. They questioned whether he had rehearsed, been coached, or had something to gain. With Regina Ventura, they simply said no questions. A bold move meant to suggest her testimony wasn't even worth challenging directly. It's not about arguing facts, it's about planting seeds of doubt. Just when you think the story can't go further, the next potential witness adds a whole new layer, Kid Cudi. Why? Because according to court filings and past claims, Cudi's car exploded shortly after Cassie started dating him. She says Diddy made threats. Then, boom. Coincidence? The prosecution doesn't think so. Now, Cudi is expected to take the stand. If he confirms the threats and the timing of that mysterious explosion, it could be the final blow to Diddy's defense. One thing's for sure. If he testifies, the entire trial could shift overnight. From that wired $20,000 to shadowy hotel setups, armed confrontations, and private performances, this trial is revealing a version of Diddy the world has never seen. It's no longer about just one person's word. It's about a growing web of people, receipts, photos, and secrets, each piece backing up the next. The courtroom may be quiet, but outside, the noise is only getting louder.